Welcome to Goal Setting, motivating your ELs to level up. I'm Ina Ziegler.
And I'm Laura Byard. We're looking forward to sharing some of our favorite tools and strategies for motivating students and measuring progress with you today. Both Ina and I come from Minneapolis Public Schools. I am the EL lead teacher at Ann Sullivan School, which is a pre-K through 8th grade with over 50% ELs. I teach 7th and 8th grade writing ELD for level 3 students and also co-teach in 5th grade for social studies and English language arts. I have taught grades 2 through 12, levels 1 through 5, and push and etc.
And I'm an EL teacher at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis. I teach 10th grade. I teach pull-out ELD classes for level 3 and 4 students, and I co-teach 10th grade U.S. history. In the past, I have taught newcomers through level 5 students. I've taught in pull-out settings, and I've co-taught in biology and English language arts, and I've also worked with students in grades 4 through 12.
During this presentation, teachers will learn how to lead students to analyze their WIDA levels, set goals with students using WIDA data, motivate students to level up using a growth mindset, and how to administer quick and simple pre- and post-language assessments.
So here's an outline for where we're going today. We'll start by just talking about our purpose and what led us to develop some of these tools and strategies and look for them and talk about them with our colleagues. We'll walk through our week 2 lesson plan, and we'll talk a little bit about progress monitoring and how it can be a great tool for student engagement. And then we'll show you some specific examples of pre and post assessments, including CBMs for speaking, writing, and reading, and then unit-specific assessments that can be used within a content area. Most of our direct experience is with 6-12 learners, and many of our examples come from that experience. We will include as many adaptations for younger students as possible, and we'll offer suggestion modifications. Our colleagues use these strategies and tools successfully with very young learners, using the WIDA can-do descriptors for kindergarten and grades 1 and 2. We've seen students of all ages engage and respond positively to this goal-setting process.
These are some questions and comments we often hear from students, especially long-term learners or newer to country students who are becoming more aware of the social stigma that being labeled ESL can carry. Why am I here? I'm not ESL. What is this class? Or I don't need you, I speak English. Or what are we doing? And this is what really motivated Ina and I to set our class up the way that we do and the way that we're about to show you. Use specific tools and strategies helps us be transparent with students about why they're in our classes, why we are co-teaching in their content courses, and ultimately helps us empower them with knowledge about their WIDA level and how to level up.
Goal setting and progress monitoring are useful research-based tools that give students ownership over their own learning. Leading educational researchers emphasize the importance of regular feedback about students' proficiency levels and progress. John Hattie writes that visible teaching and learning is where the teacher and student both seek to ascertain whether and to what degree the challenging learning goal is attained, when there is deliberate practice aimed at the attaining mastery of the goal, and when there is feedback given and sought. Then Carol Dweck, who has written so many great books and articles about the role of mindset in student achievement, says, if, like those with the growth mindset, you believe you can develop yourself, then you're open to accurate information about your current abilities, even if it's unflattering. What's more, if you're oriented toward learning, as they are, you need accurate information about your current abilities in order to learn effectively.
We're going to start by walking through the lessons that Ina and I use after we've covered the name games, team building, school's rules, and procedures that you do in week 1. These lessons are for when you're ready to start getting into academics. These lessons can be done in your own pull-out classroom. They can also be something that's incorporated into a co-teaching environment. Again, they can be done in kindergarten through 12th grade. As Ina mentioned before, many of our specific examples are from the older grades. But I have colleagues at the school that I work at, which again is K-8, that are using some of these same tools in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And we'll offer suggestions on how to modify our specific examples whenever we can. During the first week of class, or at the very beginning of the second week, we have students complete a writing assessment for all students. Again, whether you are doing a pull-out or you're in a push-in, all students, EL or otherwise, to get the baseline writing assessment for your whole class. Because if you're truly in a co-teaching environment, you're going to be wanting to help develop the academic language of all students, and plus that gets great buy-in with you as the teacher in the classroom, as the EL teacher, and what your role is for the teacher and for the students too as well. And these assessments can be, as this example here, the WIDA model assessment, the WAPT, just as a very, very simple assessment, or some other assessments that we might use that we'll show later on. You can adapt any sort of writing assessment. What we like about this, though, is right away we see what the student's writing level is as most compared to what they're going to be doing on the WIDA access test later in the year. Once we have writing assessments from every student, we're ready to start our academic language and goal setting lessons. As common practice in Minneapolis Public Schools, we have students put their learning targets in their learning logs. We have to post our learning targets and have the students somehow engage with the learning target every day. One way that we do it is have students write it, which we keep in their binder. So here's an example of our learning targets from the beginning of the year. I can explain what it means to level up, and I can evaluate my own WIDA writing level, which I use these exact learning targets with newcomers in middle school as a way to where we're going.
And our students would have a typed sheet of paper, a template that matches what you see on the screen here, that they do keep a place in their binder. We have a place for them to pre-self-assess and post-self-assess. Obviously here we have the students copying exactly what we've written. There are ways to adapt that, though, for younger students or for more recently arrived students, students with limited formal schooling, who are not going to be able to copy that entire sentence on their own. The teacher could type the learning targets ahead of time onto a sheet and give that to the students, maybe leaving blanks for this to fill in with some keywords. It's also possible to download or find fonts that are easy for students to trace. So that could work well for students who are just also learning to write letters. You could type the learning target in that font and then have the students trace over it. You can also absolutely use pictures, and that can be a part of the assessment as well, the way that they do the self-assessment. Or with younger students or students who are not writing yet, they can say the learning targets orally or repeat them rather than even worrying about having them write it down.
All of our templates are going to be made available on a Google shared folder, so you'll be able to download and then copy and paste these into your own Word or Google Doc to be able to format it for your own lessons. So if you like our templates, you'll be able to use those. There's many ways that students can self-assess. In the beginning, we have students pre-assess, and then that way at the end of the lesson, at the end of the day, we remove those X's on the board, and that way students can then have a spot to post-assess. We do a numerical scale, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 means you can teach someone else. 3 means you've got it. 2 means you need a little more practice. And 1 means you don't get it. Also, with our younger students, we use smiley and frowny faces, and the students, they have the 3 faces, and the students will circle the one that that matches how they're feeling about the learning target, or even a simple thumbs up and thumbs down I've seen used with kindergarten students. Do you target? Do you still need work?
Here's an example of the vocabulary routine that we use with students. We use this routine to teach new words throughout the year, focusing on essential content language and Larry Bell's 12 power verbs.
We provide students with the word, part of speech, definition, and example, which they copy into their dictionaries. We'll show you some modifications in a couple of slides. After they put the word in their dictionaries, students then complete oral and written practice. Jeff Swears encourages multiple practice opportunities, which allows students' communication to become clearer and stronger each time. In our routine, students practice orally 3 times with 3 different partners and then complete the writing practice. With younger students, you might actually have them start with only 1 verbal practice and then build up to doing it with partners as they build up their stamina.
This routine may happen all in one day, or the different components may be broken up into a couple of lessons or spread across a whole week. However it works best in your classroom, we found it incredibly helpful to have a regular routine, multiple practice opportunities in multiple modalities, and a dictionary format that students use and refer back to throughout the unit or year. During this lesson, we teach the words level, explain, and evaluate. As you'll notice, when it's appropriate, we intentionally add in different forms of the word and give students opportunities to practice with them. Here, we teach both explain and explanation and include practice with both forms. This dictionary routine can be a good space to explicitly teach and explore grammatical points. For example, nominalization for older or more advanced students, or even plurals for younger or newer students. Teaching these words allows us to provide students with useful vocabulary to discuss academic language and set goals, while at the same time teaching the routines we'll use throughout the year. We're setting up the routines and procedures we'll need to help learning happen efficiently and effectively for the rest of the school year, while diving into content that's engaging and relevant for students. We find that this helps a great deal with student motivation. These lessons feel purposeful to students and help answer the questions, why am I here, and why are we doing this?
Here's one way to modify the dictionary format that our kindergarten teacher used. She simply had the word. She downloaded a trace font, which is free from the internet, and would type the word for the students to trace. Students who then were ready and could copy words would be able to copy the words in the boxes, and the students would continue to make a sketch. From there, at the end of the year, or for students again in first grade, or students who are ready, you could still have a space for students to write a sentence or even just a fill-in-the-blank sentence at the bottom too as well.
After we've established our learning targets and students have some of the key vocabulary they'll need, I begin with a class discussion about what academic language actually is. I have students talk either as a whole group or with a partner or a small group about how many languages they speak, how many languages are in our room, and whether students speak the same way at home as they do with their friends, or at school or with their families. We're starting to establish the idea that we speak lots of different languages, and even within one language, we speak different ways in different contexts and for different purposes. Once we've talked about different languages and different registers, I introduce academic language within the context of our content. This example is from a 6th grade science class that I was co-teaching in. So in this example, I introduce academic language as the language that scholars and scientists use to communicate with each other. I emphasize that everyone in our class is a scientist and a scholar. Just as it's important to establish that everyone in the classroom is a scholar and can use scholarly academic language, I think it's also important to present ourselves as teachers, also as learners. So I like to present myself as a language learner and introduce the idea that we can have different academic language levels in different languages. It has nothing to do with how smart we are or one language being better than another. Language learning is a process, and our level just depends on how much time we've spent learning it, and in what context we've studied. So I present to the students in Somali, I'm a level 1. In Spanish, my academic language level is probably a level 5.5 because I've studied for many years. In American Sign Language or Ojibwe, I have a lower language level. In English, because it's the first language that I learned and because I've used it for college, I am a level 6. But this helps students see that one person can have many different language levels, all depending on their level of experience and how much time they've studied. This helps the idea of a language level less personal and less stigmatizing for students. It also helps them notice and celebrate the skills and strengths that they or their family members have in several different languages. At this point, we're ready to talk about how we determine language levels. So I point out that we can use the WIDA CVC criteria. This is also available in that shared Google Drive folder. These are the criteria that are a little simpler and a little more student-friendly, perhaps, than those can-do descriptors can be. These are just less wordy, so it helps students see complexity, vocabulary, and control. It can be pretty easy for them to understand. Again, you can modify this either by using pictures to represent the different levels, or by using a little more student-friendly language if you are working with younger learners or even middle or high school students. Certainly the rubric that you give to students can be modified to make sure that it's accessible and understandable, because ultimately this is a tool for students to use. So I pass this out on a sheet that they can also keep in their binders for the school year. We'll refer back to it, and that's part of the progress monitoring to help students take more ownership over their level and their progress. So we'll look at it, and I start by having them analyze my levels. So if my language level in Somali is a level 1, what does that mean I can do? In Spanish, it's a 5.5. What does that mean I can do? Students start to associate those levels with particular skills, and I think that also gives them a greater sense of ownership and a greater sense of an ability to make progress, because they can see specifically what the difference between a lower level and a higher level is, and they can start to think about ways that they might move their own writing, speaking, reading, etc. Up, and that's where we want them to be.
Now it's time for students to get ready to assess their own academic language levels. We start by looking at other student samples, which are available from the WIDA model kits. These examples are from the 6-8 band, but you could follow a similar process using student samples from any grade level. I'm going to walk through each of the steps on the other slide. Here's an example of a middle school student who has highlighted the differences between the level 3 and 4 samples using the CVC rubric, which is on slide 16 in this presentation and also in the Google Drive folder. This is an ELD pullout class, but you can do this in mainstream classes. For the ELD pullout class, all the students were level 3, so that's why I only gave them a level 3 and a level 4 example. However, if this was a class of mixed levels or students who were ESL and non-ESL, then you could show them all the levels and not to point out any of the students' specific levels and have them analyze the differences from level 1 all the way up to what grade level would look like. For grade level samples of text, you can look at the appendices of the Common Core ELA standards. Younger students, they can do this as well, but you can simplify the language if necessary, from academic language to circle the big words, or circle the vocabulary words, or circle the big science words, to count the numbers of words in each sentence. And then that way students will have a visual idea of what the difference is from a level 1 all the way on up. For kindergarten, you can have sticky notes or index cards that have a picture, model of one word, a phrase, a sentence, and have the students match the cards or sticky notes to the writing samples that they see. This student noticed that there were more transition words and specific vocabulary in the level 4 sample.
Another way you can do this is to ask students to determine what the level of a sample is based on the Can-Do descriptors or the CVC rubric without telling them ahead of time what level it is. This works well in a group that does have mixed levels, where you don't want to point out any individual student's level, where you want to provide all students with an exposure to all the levels from 1 through 6. Or where students maybe have already done that initial assessment and they're pretty familiar with the process. They might be ready for a challenge. And so you can have them in small groups or in partners, give the students all different samples at different levels, and then ask them to figure out what level it is and justify their opinion with evidence. You could then show student samples that match their individual level when you pull them out individually for one-on-one conferences. And when you're doing some individual goal setting, which is what we'll get to next. Again, with younger students, it would maybe work well to do matching instead, where the students maybe have on the wall or on the table in front of them some labeled samples, and then students match the unlabeled ones to those visuals in front of them. So they match the level 1 with the level 1. And any students at any age or level should be able to do that.
Now that students have had an opportunity to familiarize themselves with the academic language levels and they've analyzed examples from other students, they're now ready to return to their own writing. We find that at this point they're more prepared to assess their own writing objectively and feel less defensive about their levels. They read through their own writing and assess it with a rubric, and then hand it in for us to read and assess and provide their score. I've seen this done with younger students where the teacher had the level examples and asked the student, what level writing do you think yours is and why? What does yours look like? Does it look like the level 3 writing? Why? And students have been able to justify saying, I wrote just as much, or I used some of the same words. Here's an example of student writing in self-assessment. This student wrote, "My writing is a level 3, write related sentences." And they're talking about what happens when you get to level 3, your sentences start to have some semblance of organization.
To wrap up this section of the lessons, once students have completed their own self-assessments and handed them in, we revisit the learning targets that we started with at the beginning. Students now rate their proficiency with these skills, and they can compare them with where they started, and we can have a little wrap-up discussion about what they've learned through doing this process. Again, with younger students, you would just use maybe a thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe smiley faces, or with older students, it works well to use some numerical system.
Once we've collected all the students' writing and self-assessment, we write a short note for each student with our assessment of their WIDA level and our reasoning, as well as their most recent WIDA level from either the Access model or WAPT. We find that students are much more receptive to this information after we've laid the groundwork for understanding academic language levels. We return the students' work to the whole class or during one-on-one conferences, depending on what's appropriate for the class context and grade level. At this point, we're ready to launch into the next lesson. The purpose for EL academic language work: to level up. Keeping the focus on leveling up and making progress helps students stay positive and helps them maintain their growth mindset. We also make sure the students save this work in their portfolio so that they can refer back to it and see the growth that they've made. So on this one, note that the student's writing was a level 3, giving a compliment that they had strong organization, academic language, trying to use the language that we are using to describe their work, but just saying that they needed to write more. Big difference between level 3 and level 4 is just how much a student can write. Here's a very simple visual template that one of my colleagues, Deirdre Quinn at Sullivan, created, which is friendly for both kindergarten on up to 8th grade and even 12th grade, levels 1 to level 5, to show students what their most recent score are and then their overall score, but helping students tease out the difference between their listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and then having students on this one, they starred the one that they were strongest in and circled the level that they needed the most work in.
In the next set of lessons, we'll revisit the writing prompt that we provided for students' initial assessment. The prompt should be as similar as possible to what students will see on both classroom assessments and the WIDA Access test, based on their grade level and the content area. To best match the access, our prompt usually has a visual, a space for brainstorming, some tips and hints for writing, and the prompt itself. For younger students, we include word banks, fill in the blanks, or spaces to trace and copy words. Again, we have some samples of these in that Google Drive folder, so you can take a look and adapt whatever fits best for your context. And this outline can be adapted to any content and grade level and can be used to create as many different assessments as necessary throughout the year.
We walk the students through the process of responding to the prompt, talking about each step, brainstorm, pre-write, topic, sentence, and details, etc., whatever is appropriate to the grade level and the task. As we go, we create visuals that demonstrate levels 1 through whatever the next level up is for our group is. In a mixed group, we create visuals for level 1 through 6. For example, my level 3 ELD group, we create examples for level 1 through level 4. These visuals are in the room throughout the year for students to refer to and can be subject specific.
During the section on reading the prompt, we emphasize looking for keywords and ideas that will be important for answering the question, and making sure that students know how to identify what they're being asked to write. Another useful aspect of creating a prompt that is similar to the WIDA Access format is that while we assess their writing, we can also help students become familiar with the test format so that they know the resources available within the prompt and within the packet itself. The Access and many other writing assessments always has lots of visuals and suggestions that students can utilize if they know how to find them.
On the Access test and in the pre-assessment, students often miss or skip this step. They may not see how it helps them. As a class, we model outlining and organizing. It can work well for students to work together in pairs or in small groups and share with other teams or as a whole before creating your large class poster, and then to continue this writing process and organizing ideas and brainstorming throughout the course of the year, referring to this poster during that time.
use this checklist, which comes right from the WIDA model assessment, to point out questions to ask before, during, and after writing. And we encourage students to use this checklist to create a high quality composition. Again, this is all about helping students know what resources are available to them so that when they complete the access, they are able to do their very best work and use everything that they have to really show what they know. Once we've gone through all these parts, we'll have students either work in small groups or as a whole class we work together to generate model compositions for each level. Often we'll start with a level 1 and then just build on it to create the level 2, level 3, etc. Again, with younger students or with lower level students, it would also be possible to provide some pieces to students ahead of time and have them match or cut and paste either individually or on big posters that will be used for the whole class. This allows students to experience the writing process at all the different levels and to better understand the effort and steps required for creating a level 1 versus a level 5 piece of writing. The levels can be adjusted depending on the needs of the students. Again, as we've talked about before, in a single level pullout, you might only have students current and next levels, while in a mixed level class, you would create models for all 6. And these can be displayed on large posters and left up throughout the year so that students always have that visual to refer to. You can see samples of the model compositions that we created with students in the Google Drive folder. Once we've created those model compositions together and students have walked through the process of creating compositions at various levels, they're ready to set their own goals for their progress and achievement during the year. I model for the students first. These goals are from a co-teaching context where I worked with a 6th grade science teacher, and so they're related to that content. Your model goals can match your content and teaching context.
Now the students have assessments with scores. They write specific goals using the strategies from the modeling and the language from the CVC rubric or whatever rubric you were using. The goals can be for the quarter, semester, or year, depending on the time frame you're working with the students. For younger and newer students, you could offer a word bank or pictures for students to choose from, or you could have the students dictate their goals orally and you and another staff person could record them. During this process, we emphasize as teachers to our students our commitment and our promise that if they work hard, put forth the effort, work towards that growth mindset, that they will level up. This creates the buy-in and the culture for the class for the rest of the year.
Here's an example of a goal-setting sheet that upper elementary, middle, and high school students can use. This is available in the Google Drive folder. The top of the page has this copy of our academic language levels for writing, which is based on the Can-Do descriptors. We created it as a team at Sullivan. We also display larger poster versions of this rubric for writing and speaking in all of our classrooms. We really recommend working with a team of teachers to create a similar student-friendly rubric with examples that are appropriate for your school, content, and grade level contexts. One of the best parts of creating this was working with content teachers and EL teachers together to really figure out what best reflected the expectations in particular classes and at particular grade levels. And it helped create that buy-in from mainstream teachers as well and helped them learn more about the WIDA levels. So we really recommend going through that process together. Here you can see how the student completed the goal sheet using language from the rubric and evidence from her own writing. She completed this goal sheet in a one-on-one conference with me. In this particular co-teaching situation, I was able to conference individually with all the students in my 6th grade science classes. My co-teacher was willing to lead the class for several days so that I could take the time to do that. If you're not able to conference one-on-one during class time, you could also have students complete this in writing and hand it in to you, or submit it to you online if that's something that's available, and you could give back comments that way. With younger students, this might just be a conversation or a check-in, and you would do the note-taking and record it. We're about to show you another option.
Here's a different version of a goal-setting sheet created by my colleague James Kindle at Sullivan that could be used with younger learners. It's also available in the Google Drive folder. In this slide, students link their goal or a dream for the future to the steps that they'll take this year. I help coach students and other teachers who've used this template about what's realistic to level up, because I definitely have some students that say, I'm going to go from a level 2 to a level 6. We talk about how typically 0.5 to 1.0 is common, and that's going to, of course, depend on the level of the student when we first get them. So level 1 students, it's more realistic for them to say that they're going to up to a level 3 if that's what they feel comfortable in doing. For a student in level 4, for example, might only level up 0.5, and so we want to help them, coach them to set realistic goals. As you can see, students have sentence frames to use if they need them. At the bottom of the page, students reflect on why this goal is important to them, if they're at the level to be able to do this, and what it will mean for them to achieve it. A crucial part of goal setting is to make time in class feel relevant and meaningful to students, and establishing their personal purpose for attending and participating is a key part of engagement. This template could also be adapted for even younger students or lower level learners. Completing the portion in a student's first language is also an option. Drawing pictures, leaving space for that is another option as well. And so is having students dictate their goals and reflection to someone else who writes for them. Then this template also gets added to their portfolio so that this can be referenced often and even adjusted if students change part of their goal.
As you're conferencing with students or reading and commenting on their goals, it can be useful to keep short notes for yourself so that you can see an overview of a whole class or group of students. I use this template since it lets me see at a glance when I conferenced with which student, what the student's current level and goal is, and what the student requested that I do to support them. Again, that's part of that commitment and promise from teacher to student, that we are in this together, we're on the same team, and I'm coming to school every day ready to support them in making progress towards their goals. We focused on writing and speaking levels and goals in this context, but you could use a similar template and process for setting reading or listening goals as well. This sheet can also be very helpful to refer back to throughout the year and to update after other assessments.
As it says, that's our first 2 weeks in a nutshell. What we do is we lay the foundation for as a classroom community. It's a light academic load to practice routines and procedures with the students, like getting your binders, getting your pencils, what to do when you pass out materials, pass back in materials, silent work time, partners time, practice those routines and procedures in the classroom. We get writing and speaking samples from students right away within the first 2 weeks and know exactly where our students are at. We get immediate buy-in from our students, and it clarifies our role and purpose as an ESL teacher, whether in an ELD class or in the mainstream classroom as a co-teacher.
So after the first 2 weeks, if you never check in on the students' goals and make their learning visible, then all of the front work is honestly useless. It's very important that we progress monitor often, measure for growth, and use something other than the WIDA Access, since it's only once a year, to communicate this to students and continue to assess their goals. I'm going to walk you through some resource easy CPMs, content-based measures, although it's always best if you use content-related information. I'll explain that as I go with each step of the easy CPM process for progress monitoring. Either way, if you need quick data, this is an easy way to translate growth for parents, mainstream teachers, to use in an IEP meeting, and for new students that you don't want to use the WAPT for since it saves time. All this work is inspired by Rita Platt and John Wolf. You may have seen them at the many conferences that they present at. Rita works in a school district in Wisconsin as a media center specialist and has had roles as a literacy teacher too as well. John Wolf is a program facilitator for the multilingual department in Minneapolis Public Schools. Their information is here in this slide. The key website you want to pull off of here is the mplsesl.wikispaces.com. It's open for anybody to share. It's mostly a Minneapolis Public Schools website where teachers file share and problem solve. However, anybody can have access to it. It's just a free file sharing place for everybody. And if you search CBM3D, which is the phrase that Rita and John used to describe this process, you'll be able to find all the materials there. The materials themselves were created by teachers at Sullivan, Deirdre Quinn, Caitlin Lindsay, James Kindle, Monty Sultan, and myself. We put this together as one of our PLCs at Sullivan in 2013, with the idea coming from John and Rita. And so they have presented this multiple times, have their slides on the web, and has graciously asked to borrow some of them to put on here as I walk through the process. When James, Deirdre, Caitlin, and I presented on these tools at the MDEL conference, we used these same slides and this same press. This is just a reminder of the database decision-making cycle that we always strive for. But John and Rita point out that this is challenging in ESL because access, as I said, is not frequent enough. There are few progress monitoring tools specifically made for ELs, and the tools are either expensive or take a really long time to administer. So with this adaptation inspired by John and Rita that the Sullivan teachers put together, and then adding in content-based assessments whenever possible, always striving for that, we make this easy, and it can happen in about 10 minutes or less. This is an example of a CBM. It's a timed, leveled reading task. There are some places you can find these online. Easy CBM was the resource we used, Dibbles, AimsWeb. There's tons of others. They're fast, they're free, they're easy to interpret, they're similar to a running record, and they're very motivating for students. As a Sullivan team, we took 3 CBMs from each grade level from easycbm.com for K-8. If your student is reading at grade level, this type of assessment is not as important, which is why we didn't go higher than 8th grade. And we connected all of them to the WIDA rubrics in a clear procedure. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's always best to use content, tech, science, social studies, math. The problem is that we don't have access to text at every single reading level for every single text that we'd want to use to assess in every single unit. However, there are very useful tools that'll get you there, such as Newsela, Reading A to Z, Science A to Z. It's a National Geographic book. Newsela is free, the rest are paid subscription. Then you can test content knowledge and get a stronger measure of actual academic language and language function within the content. However, if you focus on creating them 1 unit a year, in however many years, you could have very meaningful assessments. We don't even have this as a team at Sullivan. It takes a lot of consistency within grade level teams, and it's something that we are working on as a team. And there is something else we've done at Sullivan to make this process a lot faster, which I'll get to end of going through the Easy CBM. It's important to administer the CBM at the student's actual reading level. So if they're in 3rd grade, this is a 3rd grade reading level, you wouldn't give it to them because your ESL students probably are not reading at grade level, or else they would most likely pass out of the WIDA access test. So for a 5th grade student that was reading at a 3rd grade level, this would be the test you administer. You do 1 minute of oral reading, time the student, allow the student to finish the passage either silently or orally. You always let them finish the passage. And then the teacher scores their oral reading fluency with the correct words per minute. What's different than simply doing a CBM is that you always have visuals that go along with the text. So in this case, all of the Easy CBMs are fiction, narrative text, and so we have pictures that go along with the story that we found from Google. With content-based, you can use images from the web, images from FOSS Kids, images from their science kids, images from your social studies curriculum, from textbooks, to be able to support the text. The visuals don't have to line up exactly, but to help the students, because pictures are supposed to be used as visuals to support students up through WIDA level 4 according to WIDA can-dos. The students will then orally retell the story after you take the text away, but they can use the picture, and this is where you can score the students' reading comprehension as well as their speaking at the same time. You will be able to print off all the materials, and on the same piece of paper, as far as your scoring materials, you will have the reading comprehension rubric as well as the WIDA speaking rubric below, so that way you can score both of them simultaneously as the student is doing their oral retell either of the story or of the content of the nonfiction text. So you use this comprehension rubric, which we have adapted from Lori Hellman from the University of Minnesota. Reading A to Z also has a strong fiction and nonfiction comprehension rubric. We use this, it's very simple, it can apply to any text, and we just simply have to choose a word from the text for each one, which is highlighted with a box around it on the ones we made. On the ones that you can make in the future, just make sure you've identified what is a key vocabulary word related to the content, science, social studies, math, whatever. If it's hypotenuse, to ask the students what that means in the math text. Below on the same sheet is the WIDA speaking rubric, which you've all seen, and you can easily make notes with your pencil as the students orally retell the story, where they're at in linguistic complexity, vocabulary usage, and their language control. And they can get 3 scores on the CBC. Finally, the last step is to get a writing sample from the students. After you've asked them to read the text, give them an oral retelling where you score both comprehension and their speaking. Now you ask them, please retell the story or retell the main idea of the article or whatever point of the article, the nonfiction article that you want them to focus on, or rewrite the scientific process in your own words. Then students can take up to 10 minutes to finish the writing sample. For higher level students, they may need more time, but typically if a student, you can get a very clear picture of what kind of writing skills they have within 10 minutes. For high school students, you're going to want to extend the time and provide possibly places to brainstorm if it's a more complex. For kindergarten, we have the same template, however, it has a box for a picture so the students can draw pictures so you can see their comprehension in that case and where they're at. Label it, copy a few words so you can prompt the students in the same way that you would for their WIDA access test and for the kindergarten test. Can you label some of your pictures? Can you write a sentence about some of your pictures? So we have that same template on that website, on the Wikispaces website, for younger students. They can use the visual supports, they can't use the text, and then you have the WIDA writing rubric on the back of the comprehension rubric and on the back of the speaking rubric to be able to use the WIDA writing rubric to get the 4 scores across the CBC. I'll show you when I say 4 scores, in this particular version, we use a different rubric adapted by teachers in Minneapolis Public Schools, but you can actually use the WIDA rubric. Here's the rubric I just mentioned. This is a rubric adapted by teachers in MPS, found on the wiki site. What they liked about it is that it has vocabulary, it has complexity, but it separates out the complexity related to organization and complexity of sentences, and instead of using language control, they use the word conventions, but it has all of the same pieces. But for simplicity, a lot of times we still use the WIDA CBC rubric. It's easier, and the students can get used to that too as well. This was an adaptation that our 3-5 team created because they believed it was more student friendly. This is an example of one of the many goal tracking sheets you'll be able to find on the MPLS wiki that Caitlin Lindsay, our teacher for kindergarten and first grade, used with students, which had their current level, the level they want to be, a place to write goals, when they were progress monitoring, and a spot to track their words per minute, especially with younger students. As we said, it's very motivating to see their fluency rate go up throughout the year. The next few slides will have no audio and will go on automatically after 15 seconds. It's just an example of all of the rubrics with the completed text and the teacher markings on it for an ESL student that we had who was reading at a first grade level in 3rd grade. Some of you may be wondering about pre-K, kinder assessments, and assessments for pre-literate students, because I said that you give them the test at the level they're at, not the grade level they're actually in. We have on the wiki too as well. Caitlin Lindsay especially helped to develop phonics testing for initial consonant, final consonants, and other tests too as well, with pictures, and then drawing pictures for students to see their comprehension, and then they can still do the oral retelling as well. So all of that is on the wiki. I know this was a very quick overview of the CBM process, but it is more linked to the work of other teachers at Sullivan and John and Rita Wolf, though I can answer any questions about that if there's something else you really liked that you'd want me to go into detail later. The next slide is actually going to show how most of the teachers at Sullivan use this in content in a much easier way. However, it only gets at oral output and then written output. Finding that sometimes using FMPs less frequently throughout the year is actually a little more helpful to get reading scores, or simply doing running records with a student during their independent reading time or during their drop everything and read can really give you a lot of information on reading. And for elementary teachers, that is something they typically do a better job at, of being able to track, as opposed to their oral fluency and then their written language too as well.
So an easy way that you can do a quick speaking and writing assessment that is content focused as well is just to use a picture or a visual. Again, this matches the WIDA Access very well, since students do that speaking assessment where they often have to look at a picture or a diagram and describe what they see in it. This gives them practice doing that, practice pulling details and connecting their ideas in writing and in speaking. So again, with this approach, you don't get the reading running record, but it makes it really easy to get a speaking and writing assessment and to do these fairly often. So I would use these every couple weeks in the science class that I co-taught. We realized that this is just a quicker, easier way to get at this assessment of student production. And those reading assessments like F&Ps and running records still happen pretty often in their literacy blocks in the younger elementary grades, or in their ELA class in the 6-8 level. So this is still a really useful way to get at what students are comprehending, and then how well they're able to describe it, how fluently they're able to write and speak about it. So we choose an image that is drawn from whatever we're working on in the content area at that time. This one is from a science unit on the water cycle. We'll have students just speak for a minute, say everything they notice in the picture, and I'll record it either on an iPad, a laptop, even an iPhone, whatever's quick and easy for you to do that. And you can just call kids over one at a time while the other students are writing. And within a minute, you can tell what vocabulary the student is using, how fluently they're speaking, how well they're connecting their ideas. Are they really just giving single words? Are they really connecting into that higher level discourse? And students can hear that too. And so that can be a really good way to then go back and let them listen to what they said and allow them to assess as well where they think they're at. And then students also have the opportunity to write what they see in the picture. Again, even a brief assessment like this will give you a really good sense of both their content understanding, which makes this a really nice kind of dual purpose assessment. You can see whether they're really understanding the concepts that you've been working on, and then also just their writing proficiency and how well and how fluently they're able to describe what they see. This is the rubric that we use then to assess. It works for both the speaking and the writing samples that you'll get from using one of those visual images. Again, it's the WIDA CBC criteria, just quicker, a little more student-friendly, a little easier to look at. You can also choose one strand that you really want to focus on. So from this particular example, we were really focusing on vocabulary usage. And so you can see on the right, we identified with the ESL teachers and content teachers all on the team, we identified what were keywords that students should know and be able to use fluently and correctly from this unit. And then we bolded the really important words that are actually part of the water cycle that we wanted all students at all levels to use. Some of those other words we might look more for from level 4 or 5 students, but we really wanted even our level 1s and 2s to be starting to at least write or attempt to write or say those key bolded words. So we use this as a very quick checklist to look through the students' written samples or to listen to and check off on their speaking assessments. And it just provides a really easy way to give very focused and immediate feedback to the student and then to have that record for yourself as well.
And what we also do is do the pre and post assessment on the same rubric, either a highlighter or a pen of a different color, so the students can then see how they have progressed and what new vocabulary words they have learned.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your attention. We hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions at all, please write them down. Dawn will be in touch with us. And we'll also provide a link to a survey that we hope you fill out. We'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts, and we'd love to just know if you do try any of this out, how it goes for you, what you learn. We're excited about continuing this collaboration across our school districts and across all these different grade levels and sites. We're excited to see how these tools can be used and modified and adapted, and really how we're figuring out how to better serve our students and meet their needs.